Well, my new and extremely small channel managed to ruffle a few feathers. Bear in mind my channel was started in October and no video would reach past 200 views. So when something reaches about 5,000 views in a couple of days, I think I've struck a nerve. At the time of recording, I've got about 370 likes and 76 dislikes. That's about 20% of the people who watched the video, they hated it. And they made their thoughts heard in the comment section. And this negative discrepancies made me think. It's made me reflect. Perhaps even reconsider some of the things I've said. And after a few days I've come to realise something. Everything I said in that video is true and 100% correct. Now I am a humble and reasonable person, and there may be some parts that are a little overzealous. But let's not beat around the bush here. The state of big AAA gaming is in a bad way. Now we've already covered that many people who make and design these bland, big games are disgusting manifestations that spiritually resemble the goobacks from South Park. And I really do want to talk more about the absolute meaning of beauty and how games fail to reflect this. But today we need to discuss something more serious. Who is funding these ugly games? Now more and more games have portion of their funding done via ESG, which is environmental, social and governance. Now what is this really? Well, it's a vessel in which venture capital investment firms push their ideological and political agendas. And if you must know, it's not an agenda I like. And going into the why are they pushing this and all the underlying reasons, that's beyond the scope of this video. But the important thing to take away from this is that it is happening and it's helping to ruin the hobby that we love. Now the biggest pushers of ESG in gaming is BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street Global Advisors, the European Investment Bank, KKR, TPG Rise and Generation Investment Management and more. What I've found is that industries adopting ESG can see 5 to 10% of the budget directed toward meeting the ESG progressive objectives. So if a game costs $100 million, 10 million is going to meeting ESG directives, and that money will typically be funded externally. So you better meet the new world order standards or you'll get nothing. And some people have even created lists to see which games have been influenced by ESG consulting groups. So now with big outside money flowing into development of AAA games, this means that the games are going to get better, right? Well, no, wrong. No, unfortunately not. These studios only get funding if they include elements that these firms wish to see. And what they want to see is in part is what makes games ugly these days. So ESG itself is an uglification element. Its outside influence is shaping the development of a game. The developers, the ones actually making the game, will need to reshape the creative vision to reflect the needs of the soulless entities such as BlackRock. It would be the same if Thomas Cole painted this, but before he could show it to anyone, he had to make quarter of the characters gay, black, and the sea level should be higher to spread awareness of global warming. To me, the most obvious way to tell if a game has ESG concepts within the game is to look at the character creation screen of many games. Does it say male or female, or does it say body 1 and body 2? Now this may appear to be a minor issue, but it is a clear example that those making, or at least funding this game, they do not even believe that men and women exist. We're just the amorphous blob of humanity. And at a fundamental level, this is a political statement. By changing these options, it immediately destroys the escapism and fantasy of a game before you even begin the game, because the game is no longer fantasy, it becomes social commentary. Now you might say this is not about forcing opinions or being political, it's about being a decent human being, it's about representing those who have no representation, it's about fighting back against Trump. And I would say this is completely wrong, and my best friend Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, he would agree with me.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors.
And this leads on to the structure of the teams that make the games. Now look at this. Let's go back to the year 2000. The most acclaimed real-time strategy game ever made. Now who made this game? Well, it's a bunch of autistic white guys toiling away, most of their lives like Michailo Volotos, never to see a woman and will die happy without the pleasure of doing so. They are dedicated 100% to the cause, and their cause was to make great games. And now it's just sad when you hear about a new Age of Empires game coming out, and we all know these guys are not the ones making it. They're probably dead, and if they're not, the only thing these guys can make now is their bed. Now let's pretend these guys got together to make a studio in 2024, and then they were bought out by a big producer. What you're seeing here, what you're looking at, this is not allowed to exist, and I'll let Larry explain.
And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seeing more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
And you did hear that right. You will get no money unless you hire people who are from a diverse background. Or if we phrase this another way, you will get money if you hire less white people. Activision Blizzard is another example. They've made significant strides through ESG-focused initiatives. The company appointed its first Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer and launched programs like embedding inclusive game design principles into their development pipeline. Now, the makeup of a development team does not matter, but if the hiring process benefits people because of their background or lack of background, it will then shape a team not connected on a merit basis. And if the merit is not a limiting factor, then are you surprised that so many games are ugly, boring and just uninspired now? There have been a number of examples of these ESG slop games being made and failing. Now, did they really fail? Well, on a commercial basis, yes, but that wasn't a failure in the eyes of BlackRock. Promoting ESG ideals across the gaming landscape is the long-term investment that is slowly but surely infecting every aspect of the gaming landscape. So when these games flop, don't think maybe they will stop making games with the really cool and interesting protagonists, and they'll start making games like they did back in a time which no longer exists and never will exist again. Unfortunately, it's just pure copium. The long-term investment strategy of BlackRock can sustain the losses. The most important thing to take away from this is that the goal is not to make money, but to force change. The best way to popularize ESG is not through making new IPs, which have not proved too successful so far, but to use established franchises. That way, you can guarantee people will buy the game from its name alone, which makes it easier to push ugly ideas. Can you even name me a big franchise that has improved dramatically in the last 5 years? And this is why I'm not excited for the next Mass Effect game. I'm not predicting that the game won't be good, it actually cannot be good. Even if only 10% of what I'm saying is true, there is no hope for any franchise on a long enough time frame. And you might be thinking maybe indie games will save us. Well, many smaller studios, especially in Europe, have received ESG aligned funding through government grants or institutional support. Like for example, Floodline is funded partly by EU grants focusing on climate awareness, Seeds of Resilience, focusing on eco-friendly living and supported by educational ESG funds. People understand that the best TV series typically end before they go on too long for people to hate them. And video games are the same. Expecting the same franchise to be good after 30 years is something only very few franchises can pull off. Unfortunately, most will likely fall victim to the hands of ugly people who will direct these franchises towards a distorted version of themselves. These disfigured creations will serve as a reminder of how good we had it, and there will be occasional glimpse of excellence amongst the sea of mediocrity and propaganda. But these will be fewer and far between as time goes by. As the wave of ESG begins to envelop the industry as a whole, the beacons of light that stand against it will slowly fade away in time.